I enjoy modern life. I like the amenities and I like video games and movies and gadgets, even if I'm not happy with the specific way the industries behind these things are operated. There are many people, however, who have misgivings about what they call consumerism, the tendency for the modern person to be a shopper for more and more things which merely fill the hole in their meaningless existence. This critique comes from both the right and the left. Right-wing anti-consumerism seems to focus on the idea that the consumption of products and the search for the easy life distracts people from their duty to form families and their duty to their civilization. And on the far right, this will include a duty to their race. Left-wing anti-consumerism seems to focus on the idea that capitalist advertising techniques manufacture desires in order to create attachment to the system and a false consciousness that prevents a proletarian awakening. On YouTube, I've heard more of the anti-consumerist perspective from dissident right circles, though I'm not going to call out anyone individually here. It's really part of a trend. Other anti-consumerists come from an entirely primitivist strand that would overthrow civilization per se, and there is a lot of overlap going on. Some of the more moderate claims made seem relatively solid to me. It's true that people become attached to brands and follow trends, consuming products that may be harmful to them in the long run in order to achieve a short-term fix. Social media also takes over people's lives. We could call this dopamine hacking. It's also true that in the grand, universal scheme of things, scarcity exists, and if we overconsume now, then we will have less later, and should therefore pace ourselves. These seem like sound points, but I've noticed that it never seems to get any more specific than this. It's more of a broad unease. Anti-consumerism always comes across as a vague sentiment that we have too much stuff, or the wrong stuff, or that we never would have wanted that stuff if it wasn't for the system anyway. It's always come across as something tacked on to a larger argument, almost like a brand itself. That's what punk is, isn't it? I've always been fairly suspicious of the perspective as it is expressed in practice. The term virtue signalling is thrown around so much that totally genuine sentiments are shot down as inauthentic all the time now, but I will say that I detect a lot of inauthenticity in anti-consumerist rhetoric. It often comes across as a way of saying, "I'm not like the sheep," without ever really telling us why. Leftist anti-consumerism has always struck me as particularly incoherent. One strawman critique of socialists is that they use products made by corporations while hating corporations. There are much better reasons to oppose socialism which I will go over in other videos, but regarding this point, this cartoon offers a satirical rejoinder cast in the feudal age. Wanting to change the system overall does not mean that you can personally at any minute disengage with that system when your entire existence is at stake. However, the question then becomes about which consumption is necessary to perpetuate existence and fulfill your goals, and which is not. The socialists who are also anti-consumerist have less wiggle room here. If you want worker control of the means of production, the fact that you have a PlayStation does not in any way make you a hypocrite, because your response can simply be that you wish to socialise Sony along with the rest. However, the anti-consumerist argument has fewer degrees of freedom, and the primitivist argument fewer still. As a young man, I was told by a vague anarchistic, communistic type, who I assumed had primitivist tendencies, that the phone was a corrupting artefact, and under his own idiosyncratic version of communism, things like that wouldn't be needed. I tested his theory by briefly confiscating his device while he whinged for it back. I was a dickhead, but was he a hypocrite? Maybe not still. The phone is clearly a worse example than the video game console, because it would be harder to live without a phone due to the necessity of having a phone number for all sorts of things, but even here we can choose the type of phone. Myself, I do not use a smartphone and continue to use the most basic models possible. This just shows that we have to get specific and we have to talk about what kinds of consumption. We can't attack modernity in such a broad way and remain respectable. If you say video game consoles are bad and then you yourself own a video game console, you're a hypocrite, or at the very least you're revealing your external locus of control. You are telling us that the entirety of society must change because you can't quit something you believe is bad for you. I think this is why most anti-consumerists never specify which kinds of consumption they want to do away with. We never actually end up having that conversation where we look into the benefit and cost to society of certain products. People like to talk up the collective in a vague, overly general way, but when it comes to paying a specific cost themselves, they clearly don't want to. There are other levels the argument can take place on, of course. On the traditionalist side of things, they have some reason to worry that the collective effects of certain kinds of consumption undermine traditionalist society. However, they are barely more comfortable specifying than the leftist anti-consumerists are, except in the rare exception of pornography. There's something much larger at work here, though. The internet as a construct undermines traditionalist society and exposes people from a young age to all kinds of degeneracy. But traditionalists know that the internet has given them opportunities like never before to politically organise in the face of suppression. We arrive at the irony that the internet accelerates the destruction of traditionalist societies while accelerating traditionalist political rhetoric, a catch-22. There are, of course, those anti-consumerists that focus not on changing society, but on changing themselves and their local community. I suppose the Amish are an example to the extent that extreme anti-consumerism blends into Luddism, although there is no overarching political project here beyond being left alone. For actual political commenters who have other stated goals for larger society, what is the solution here? A total focus on work ethic and the denouncement of pleasures? I mean, I would oppose that, but at least it would be a position to take. Mindless hedonism is shitty, but so is behaving like a mindless productive automaton. There seems to be a middle ground or a synthesis that has to be specified, and the sloganeering of consumerism bad doesn't seem to help, because without specification the only thing it seems to imply is an extreme approach where we get rid of consumerism wholesale and create some kind of grey and Spartan society. After someone has gone into great details on other objections to modern life, I don't really want to hear the tacked-on sentiment of the globalists are turning us all into homogenous consumers anymore, unless it's followed up with an explanation of what you're going to do about it. Otherwise, it really is a bunch of empty virtue signalling. This vulgar anti-consumerism has to mature substantially before I can take it seriously.